Okay. Everyone can start to kind of funnel in and sit down on a side. We'll go ahead and get started with our activity in just a minute once everybody's in. Okay, so we're going to start with a little brief activity in the spirit of Thomas Aquinas, being a very philosophical man. Anybody who's studied a little bit of philosophy notices that they always have these arguments with themselves inside of their work. They try to debate people, try to decide what's the right answer. So we're just going to start with an activity where this side of the room is going to be debating this side of the room. Okay? Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky for you. You guys don't get to choose what you're debating for. Okay? So I'm going to say, you guys believe this. And I'm going to say, you guys believe this. And you need to be ride or die. Ride or die. Ride or die for that particular opinion. So, how's this going to work is you guys can just kind of throw your hand up if you want to speak for your team. Just out of generosity, let it be this team speaks, this team speaks, this team speaks, this team speaks. And I'll just call it at some point when I think that one team won. So let's just start it off strong with, is a hot dog a sandwich? Okay, I think this is a very common one. I think everybody in this room has probably heard that once before. Now we're going to say, this side, you guys believe that hot dogs are sandwiches. You guys do not believe that hot dogs are sandwiches. Now, the burden of proof will fall on you guys, so you guys get to go first, and then your side, and then we'll go back and forth however many times we need to. So, who wants to start you guys off? Jackson. Strong opening remark. Hands, Walter, hands. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Chandler with their hand up immediately. Repeat your question. Marina. Okay, Riley. Hand. You may. Jackson. he just said a lot of things. I don't know if half the things he just said were correct, but I'm just going to say you guys have one response. If I deem this as a good enough response, you can continue the debate. If not, they get the win. So, there's 4 hands. You guys as a team point, decide who wants to talk. No, one response. One response. It looks, Riley's the only one with his hand up. Do you guys trust him? Okay, Riley. Or speaking out of turn. Overruled. Okay, this team wins. Riley got lost in his thought. Okay, we're going to do one more. Caroline, do you remember the one that I said was really good that we were talking about just a minute ago? No pressure on you. A lot of pressure on you because I don't remember it. Okay. Do you guys want to do Velcro or laces, or do you want to do Disney or Nickelodeon, or do you want to do Is the Earth a Ravioli, or do you want to do Luke or Madeline, or do you want to do Pippo or Sarah? Huh? What'd you say? The Earth is a ravioli? Yeah, it's pretty much the same general concept. Huh? No. What'd you say, Grace? Velcro versus laces? Okay. So, losing team, you guys get to decide, would you rather fight for Velcro or laces? Laces? General consensus, laces? Going once? You guys have to 5, 4, laces. Okay. So you guys are going for Velcro. Since they got to pick, you guys get to make the first argument. No. Go ahead. Who wants to say Velcro? Grace. She brought up efficiency. What do you guys got? Okay. Tried to time God. I don't know how well it worked. I see Pippo is very passionate back there. Do you have something, Marcy? Is that your hand? Holly? Hmm. Chandler. Okay, okay. We're running out of time for this part, so it's gonna have to be speed. Like you have to respond in 20 seconds. Okay. I'm gonna. Have you said something yet, Olivia? Okay, Olivia, you got it. Ooh. Thank you for your testimony, Reina. Seconds. Maddie. Do you like ice cream for breakfast? I'm gonna have to give it to this team. They had a lot of really good arguments. No, no, no. Hey, 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 hey. I think we're all winners here because none of us have to. Yes, some are indeed less winners. You guys can just continue this conversation for the rest of your lives to better determine what the true answer is. With that being said, with that being said, um, tonight we are talking about Thomas Aquinas. Obviously, he is a great theologian, and he is often known as this very smart guy. And often, I know a lot in my life, I hear people talk about Thomas Aquinas, like, oh, well, Aquinas says blah, 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 blah. It's a super complicated thing. I don't understand it at all. There's so much you have to know behind it, I feel like. So we wanted to have this talk about Thomas Aquinas today on his feast day, and we will be having Father Gregory Tipton giving the talk. So with that being said, hopefully after his talk, after discussions tonight, everybody will be able to have some casual table talk about Thomas Aquinas. So with that being said, Father Gregory.
No, hear me in the back. Yes, no, maybe so. Okay, good. All right, I will start out with a little bit about who I am. If you don't know me, my name is Father Tipton. I'm the priest at St. Elroy Catholic Church, located in Bishop, Georgia, about 10 minutes down Tennessee Road near Watsonville. I graduated from UGA in 2009 with degrees in philosophy and political science. I went on to do All right, so I graduated from UGA in 2009, degrees in political science and philosophy, double majored, went on to Duke University for grad school, got a master's of divinity. I have come into life completely backwards and did everything the wrong way. I was not raised in any sort of church. I found my faith at UGA, sort of. I became an Episcopalian, went to Duke, was fake ordained as an Episcopal priest, not really with valid apostolic succession. I served at the Episcopal Center right down the street for several years. I'm the one who got the mural painted on that wall by some art students and had a big garden and other stuff down there. That's St. Patrick and St. Francis and St. Mary on that wall, if you walk up and down looking. So anyway, at that point, I, being originally a philosopher who converted to Catholicism, I read a lot of Plato and Aristotle, amongst others. I was first a modernist philosopher, then became an ancient, and then got into the faith from there, and then became interested in religion from there, but quickly rooted out a lot of stuff. So I converted, here I am, former Episcopal priest, now Catholic priest. I'm a married Catholic priest. I have 3 kids, Maria, Leo, and Beckett. Beckett is about a week and a half old now. That's rare, as a case-by-case scenario. The Pope has to say yes to that, and it's a special exception for former Anglican priests in the Catholic Church. So if you see me with a woman and children, don't be frightened. My wife's name is Beckett. So Aquinas, that was interesting to see y'all argue. It was fun. Lots of logical fallacies. Very good. So, what to say about Aquinas? I like the introduction because you give a nice summation of how Aquinas is used today. Aquinas frequently is used as a cudgel today. He is someone that you can bash someone over the head with and say, Aquinas says, and treat him like he's an encyclopedia, right? Like he's an encyclopedia. So Aquinas comes from a long tradition that comes from Plato and Aristotle on one hand, right? The Greek philosophers, who then were picked up to the Romans. And Roman philosophy is basically Greek philosophy warmed up. You get 30 seconds in the microwave. They were very pragmatic people. And the Israelite cult, right? The sacrifices and the priesthood of God's chosen people, Israel. And those two came together in Christ. And so you see reason in certain forms of life, practices, activities, ways of living, like praying and going to Mass and adoration, things like this, mixing. And what became basically a form of Neoplatonism that took the name Catholicism in the first century. That's what you have, right? So when you read the early church fathers, you notice something really interesting, the complete absence of the word religion. It didn't exist in Greek or Hebrew or Syriac or Aramaic or anything. In fact, the word religion as we use it today is a 16th century creation by Thomas Hobbes, a modernist philosopher. That's why I say I don't have a religion. I have a philosophy. It's called my faith. And you see this with people like St. Macrina. Now, why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this to say that Aquinas is coming from a certain line of approaching reason. So in the ancient world, especially from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, who were a minority. Okay, they were the minority position. Socrates and Plato and Aristotle lost the cultural war in Greece. They completely lost it. They were fighting a group of people called the Sophists, especially underneath the leader Pericles. And essentially Greece became a bunch of ethical relativists, despite the fact that Socrates could consistently show that they were running into logical contradictions. Any of you taking logic at UGA, symbolic logic? Raise your hand if you're taking symbolic logic. Take symbolic logic. If you get through college and have not taken symbolic logic, you don't deserve to get a degree. I'm being dead serious. In the Catholic tradition, you took logic when you're like 14. Like you were young, right? Today when we say critical thinking, we normally mean something like scientific skills or the ability to use rhetoric. That's not logic. Scientific methods, plural, are a form of inductive reasoning, where you're collecting data and analyzing it using concepts, hoping to capture some general pattern. That is at best a probability, and it's a different kind of reasoning than you do in mathematics, which is usually purely deductive, right? That means logic is larger than both of those and encompasses both, right? So if you've never taken logic, there's no way you can actually think critically, right? This is one of the big myths. I was fed it. I went to a magnet school that studied science and technology and all that fun stuff. And then I got into liberal arts at UGA, poli-sci, and from there philosophy. And I slowly discovered I have no idea what critical thinking is, and nor do any of my professors. None of them, almost. And so what you see then is underneath the ancient world, and in the ancient world there's no symbolic logic. Aristotelian logic is very different. But in the ancient world, when they said reason or logic, what they meant was something akin or analogous to a kind of craft, that you had to learn the moves from a master in order to argue properly, right? So when you take logic, you learn things like fallacies, right? So if I say, well, it can't be that because it came from this other thing, right? Someone said it came from Frankfurt, not to pick on anyone. Genetic fallacy, right? Just because I came from something doesn't make me that. Otherwise, I'd be my mom or my dad, wouldn't I? Right? But I'm not. Someone mentioned the slippery slope fallacy, right? A minor fallacy can be right, can be wrong, right? Depends on the situation. So those are examples, though, where you learn what is valid and what's invalid in an argument, okay? And there are valid argument forms. I'm not going to get too much into that. Modus ponens, modus tollens. And those are the valid forms that are used in everything, from history to art to mathematics to literature, computer science, business. Those forms of argumentation hold in any discipline. So when a discipline says something like, well, this is a purely subjective discipline, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about, right? That's the fun thing about logic, is it applies to everything. And for us as Catholics, what's fascinating is logic even applies to us. Am I being consistent within myself and my beliefs? And that's what we call ethics, right? Largely, to some degree. So ethics then, right, the moral life, if you will, for us the moral life in Christ, became a question of how do I live and think rightly and desire the right things in the world, okay? And so reason was more like a craft to the ancients. It's more like a craft. And here's the thing about a craft. To learn a craft, you need a master and you need some sort of community, right? Masters don't just pop up out of nowhere. Like, I learned how to think for myself. That's not true, right? Notice this. Anytime someone ever tells you, I'm going to teach you how to think for yourself, what they're saying is, that's what I do, right? But if you learn to think for yourself like them, then who are you thinking like? Like them, which is not thinking for yourself. And so thinking for yourself is impossible. It's impossible. It's an Enlightenment myth. Every good master knows, I don't want you to think for yourself. That's idiotic. I want you to think like me, right? Think about chemistry. Imagine you're in a chemistry class. Your professor says, I want you to think for yourself and forget everything we've ever known. Okay, so I don't know what acid is. Let me just play with this and gurgle it for a while and see what it does, right? You don't want to do that, do you? You want to actually inherit some kind of tradition. We've actually worked out some contradictions and some problems. Don't put your hand in that barrel. I'll tell you why. And if you want, you can relearn how that's the case, right? By going back through a series of contradictions, saying, we know it can't be this, here's the experiment, run it, and therefore it must be that. So actually, the way that you learn any discipline is by going back through all of the contradictions that people have run into before you. That's the proper sense of a tradition. A tradition is where you have one long, sustained argument. That's what a tradition is. Not, it's old, therefore good. Laces or Velcro. It's one long, sustained argument, right? We've tried all this. It doesn't work. That's why this tradition is still alive, right? And the Romans called that antiquitas, right? When they said experience, they didn't mean like a private inner theater in your head, like I had an experience. They meant tried and true. This way of living works because we're alive, and our tradition's alive, and our culture's alive, and others have risen and fallen, right? And think about that. The Catholic tradition has seen empires and states rise and fall over thousands of years. We're like one of the oldest things in the world, right? And even as a continuation fulfillment of the Israelite cult before us, right? That makes us 5,000 years old. If you go back to Adam and Eve, we're as old as mankind, right? That's the truth. So Aquinas, then, how does Aquinas fit into all this? So if you think about reason in that vein, and then you think about Aquinas as a man. So who is Aquinas, right? He's not a walking encyclopedia. Aquinas was a Dominican. He's in a religious order. And the Dominicans were created to help combat heresies, right? Heresies being people who say, I hold to the Catholic faith, but they've instantiated a contradiction within their faith, whether in thought, word, or deed. If you look at his seminal work, his magnum opus, the Summa, right? Everyone's heard of the Summa. No one's ever read the Summa, hardly, right? And people will get up and they'll give you talks and say, you all need to read the Summa. And most of you are never going to read the Summa. That's okay. But if you look at the table of contents in the Summa, here's what you'll notice. There we go. The Summa begins with God, and then the Holy Trinity, and then the creation of the angels, and the creation of man, and so on and so forth, all the way until the final judgment and the resurrection and life everlasting. The Summa is addressing questions about the Christian arc, the Christian narrative, from beginning to end. That's what Thomas Aquinas is actually doing. We think, in an encyclopedic age, the age of Wikipedia, that what he's doing is saying information organized by A to Z. To the ancients, the idea that the only way of organizing knowledge is alphabetically would have seemed stupid. They would say, you don't have a unified theory of your own existence. You just have the alphabet and random facts. What good will that do you? Right? At the end of the day, you want to live as a man. You have to know what to do. You need to know how it all fits together. And so in their era, the disciplines were united. And there's a whole history of how the disciplines became separate, of how you all study different things, can find yourselves disagreeing because your disciplines say different things, right? And very, very few people study the philosophy of their disciplines to know what the fundamental axioms of their disciplines are. All right, so for example, if you study political science or economics long enough, you discover these fundamental assumptions, like man is simply a creature of sentiments, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. That all you're saying is man is a dog or no better than one, which is fundamentally at war with the Catholic anthropology that man is a rational creature. Those are actually irreconcilable positions to take. And so if you're going to be Catholic and study economics, you better get a lot smarter quick. You better start reading more broadly and reading deeper so that you don't lose your faith. That's how most people in college lose their faith, right? It's actually because they're studying things and they're not thinking enough. They think they're thinking a whole lot, but they're not reading outside their class. It's from lack of thinking that people lose their faith, not enough. What happens is people read just enough to think I'm smart, they lose their faith. They're just smart enough to be dangerous to themselves and others. They're not truly intelligent, not truly studious, because someone who is studious is someone who delves deeper. Whereas what we generally have is called curiositas, curiosity. We read lots of information everywhere, and we can't put it together, and then we lose our faith. So Aquinas, then, is a kind of, by today's standards, what we call a systematic thinker. But he's a Catholic. He's saying, here is the story of Christianity. And in that story, there have been a series of questions that have arisen. I mean, in some ways, for those of you who like English or literature, think about the Summa like an elongated conversation amongst professors and PhDs about a novel, where you sit around and you talk and you have questions about this scene and so on and so forth, and various interpretations. Now, in the modern day, right, at the end of the conversation in your English department, you say something like, well, we all have our own ideas, and there's no way for reason to actually figure out the answer, is there? So at the end of the day, all you do is you pick out your 5 random quotes from your book and you throw it in an essay, and you go, and that's my position. And you use what looks like a scientific method on literature, which is a total joke, but that's what we do, right? We're using one methodology from one game, biology, and trying to apply it to English or literature to give it an appearance of being rational, because our view of reason has changed over the last 300 years. So there are now 2 other views of reason, and this will be important for why we are misusing Aquinas and how you can actually start to think like Aquinas. One is called the genealogical viewpoint of reason. The genealogical viewpoint of reason is that essentially, this is through Friedrich Nietzsche, famous philosopher, that essentially the problem with reason, if you go all the way back to Socrates, is that Socrates always wants to do this thing called the dialectic with people. And so the dialectic is where you say, how do you define sandwich or hot dog? And then I will say yes to your definition. I'll agree with you. And then I will ask you a series of questions to see if you run into a contradiction internally with your own definition. Therefore, coming to the point where you have to say, I renounce my position. That is markedly different than simply trying to argue flat out against someone with a different definition. If you don't have the same definitions, you can't have an argument. All you have is the appearance of an argument. You ever watch presidential debates? It's a joke, right? Total joke. It's like, watching entertainment now. That's what I do for fun. So, so the genealogical says, well, look, actually there's no such thing as reason. It's all will to power. And arguments are just a way for people to get control over other people. That's all it is. And that's largely true if you study rhetoric, or maybe if you join debate teams at UGA that don't always actually study logic, right? And I saw lots of that. The other viewpoint is called the encyclopedic, which literally came about from the guys who wrote the encyclopedias, right? So again, the creation of the encyclopedia was, in some ways, a huge change in human history. It's the first time we thought about knowledge as being alphabetically organized, instead of being organized as think about being itself, and then think about, think about grammar as sort of ordered words, and logic as what that can tell you and how it connects to being. And rhetoric is making these truths that we can discern about beings sound beautiful and persuasive. And then think about number in space as geometry, and number in time and space as astronomy. Think about number itself as arithmetic. Think about philosophy as sort of dwelling upon being. And then theology being the sort of queen of disciplines, where being itself has been revealed to us. And it's all interconnected in a sort of pyramid of understanding that you can sort of climb and come back down. So the encyclopedic says, no, there's no unified theory to anything, to any existence. There's just random facts. And every discipline, therefore, must be separate. Therefore, they're all free to have different axioms, different definitions, which means it's going to be really hard for you to talk across disciplines now. And in some ways, almost impossible, because you have a different vocabulary. So even when you think you're using the same word in the same way, you may not be. Try putting a neuroscientist, a philosopher, and an English major in the same room and talk about consciousness. None of them have any idea what a consciousness is. I don't know what a consciousness is. I don't think they even exist. It's an idea posited by Freud, based on six, didn't he have 6 original subjects? Anyone study this? 4, he put in like heroin or crack cocaine or something. Then he lied about his data. And he projected these concepts. And so we know all of his evidence is wrong. We've kicked him out. We've treated him like an artifact. And yet, his ideas persist in our language, don't they? They haunt us. How many people in the everyday world, and even in neuroscience, talk about the consciousness like it's a thing? When I got bored on Friday, Saturday night in Duke, I'd go out to the neuroscientist conferences and just raise my hand and say, "What's a consciousness?" And they just walk, duh. You guys been studying it for 35 years. What is it? Give me a clean definition. Genus, status, and the attribute that distinguishes it from other species. Can't do it. No idea what you're studying. But you're being paid millions of dollars in federal grants to do it. That is a huge problem. What that means then is that because reason has changed and it's made interdisciplinary talk almost impossible, we're not even sure what we mean when we say reason. So the encyclopedia just says what we need then are just facts and information. Just facts. We're not even sure what they're for anymore. And so we think that facts are separate from values or ethics. Never asking the question, why do you want to know? The only reason you ask a question about a fact or information is because you want something. That's a desire. It's not reason. Right? Years ago, I went to a psychology conference at UGA as I think an undergrad. And the head of the psychology department then said, we're trying to figure out this strange anomaly in the study we did. So we had these guys come in, and they've had various damages to their frontal lobe, right? And which is supposed to damage your emotions, right? Like a lobotomy. And so we gave them this poker game. It's like 5-card draw. You put in $1, your chances of winning are 50%. If you win, it's a $1,000 payoff. And so their thesis was, rationally, you'd play the game, right? Any good mathematician or business major would say, yeah, that's rational. None of them would play. Why? Because the frontal lobe's taken, which made them figure out, oh, wait a minute, that's actually not a rational thing, that's desire. It's a desire to think that calculation, right, is rationality. And they realized this. They said, oh, no, we're still Cartesian in the psychology department. Nah. So here's the thing, right? So if you buy into this kind of encyclopedic view, you'll never have a coherent view of yourself or the world. You'll know who you are, where you stand. If you have the genealogical view of reason, reason's just power. That's all, right? That there actually is no truth. But let's take that proposition logically. If I said there is no truth, is that proposition true or false? If you say it's true, then it's true and it's false. That's a contradiction. And therefore what? Must be false. Yeah, you can never ever say there is no truth. You're contradicting yourself in uttering that proposition. Right? That's how you can know ethical relativism is not true. So you know relativism is not true. Because every time you try to assume the position, it defeats itself. That is how logic is helpful. That is what we classically call a reductio ad absurdum. Reduction of a proposition to absurdity. Apply that to your own behavior in your own life, and you can begin to close a lot of doors when it comes to discernment about what I should do. More importantly, who I should be. And by the way, side note, don't ask and don't answer the question, what do you want to do in life? Right? The question is, who do you want to be? Figure that out, then what to do becomes a lot easier. Who do you want to be? That's the question. So Thomas Aquinas, then, is an ancient. He is writing at a time when reason is thought of more like a kind of communal activity which requires moral commitments. You have to want truth in order to enter into this community of Dominicans or into the Catholic Church. So reason and passion are not separable, as most of the modern philosophers believe. They're not separable. And so your master is someone who you're willing to submit to learn from. And hopefully that's what you're doing here at the university. If you have not befriended professors, you need to befriend good professors here. There's always some rotten ones. You need to find the good ones and go to their hours and hang out with them and get to know them. If you're of age, drink wine with them, talk with them, get to know them. That is the best way to really learn your discipline, right? When I was in seminary at Duke, we used to always say real theology starts after sundown, right? With professors and other good grad students. So Aquinas then is not this encyclopedic reason guy who's going to beat you over the head with the right answers. He is faithful. He's reflecting on the narrative of the faith. And he actually thinks that reason is something that you have to craft within yourself. You have to learn the right moves from a master. And so you, as Catholic university students, are in a very particular situation. The university is a Catholic creation. Did you guys know that? The Catholic Church invented the university, right? Historically, it was designed to train priests. That's what it originally was. It was designed to train priests. They would take their lessons in the chancel. A chancel is like a little step up here before the altar, back when the altars used to always be against the wall. And you'd have your pews where your monks would chant the Liturgy of Hours, morning, evening prayer. You would sit there for like 8 or 10 or 12 hours and take notes and learn everything you could about philosophy and anatomy and biology and mathematics, theology, etc. So the university was constructed to be the kind of moral community that is necessary for intellectual formation. That's what it was originally founded to be. And it has since then fallen apart. Is there any overarching moral commitments that you can think of any major university in the United States today says it has? Other than sort of the usual vague secular we're affirming of everything, which obviously is not true, right? You come in and you're like some kind of crazy terrorist who wants to kill everyone in the whole world. They're like, we don't affirm that, right? So this is one of the fun things, right? We say things like we're tolerant, we're affirming, but you can't actually be tolerant and affirming of everything. No one actually believes that. That's the better part. That same psychological meeting I was at, I had someone who said this, right? So you try to do the reductio ad absurdum to someone, if they're being illogical, that's just logic. But I said, no, let's think about it this way. No one is actually an ethical relativist. So how do you know that? I said, if I come across this table at you swinging, you're going to be screaming, that's unjust. Help me. Most humans, when they're being attacked, believe in justice. That's just true, right? What you're saying is you ought not do that. That's a claim about justice. Or you ought do this. It's a claim about justice. And so as Catholics in the modern university, you're not provided with the kind of community that you actually need for real intellectual formation. That's the job of the Catholic Center. Right? So probably the great inheritor of Thomas Aquinas' thought is St. John Cardinal Henry Newman. Anyone ever heard of him? His name is on the founding block right by the front door across the street. Have y'all seen that? Right? This is why originally in the 60s, all the Catholic centers were called Newman centers. They were actually saying, we need Catholic centers to start thinking and reading more like Newman. Newman, especially in his work, the idea of university, where he says the job of the university is to teach the universals about what is universally true, and then to help particular people to conform to that in particular ways that fulfill their calling to be faithful Catholics. And so if you really want to think like Aquinas, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you need to read the Summa, because you're probably not going to, and you probably don't have the necessary prerequisites to read it and understand it. And that's not me being judgmental or anything. Like, if you got the time, sure, read Aristotle's metaphysics and his categories and all of Plato, and then you go through all the modernists and figure out what's wrong with them, and then read some political philosophy, and then, maybe you're ready after like 5 years. Most of you probably don't have that kind of time, right? That's the job of priests. But if you do, as a university student, want to think more like Aquinas, it's actually, ironically, probably not by reading Aquinas. You need to think like him more than to be able to regurgitate what he says. Right? So this is what everyone said. Aquinas says, right? Aquinas would probably say, oh, come on now. It's like an appeal to authority fallacy. Just because I said it isn't what makes it true. My argument is what made it true. That's the difference, right? So, as university students, I would say this. Here's my recommendation. Unsolicited advice. Read some Plato before you get out of college. You should at least read the Republic. It used to be necessary reading for every college student. You could not get through college without reading Plato's Republic. In fact, most people read it in high school. You couldn't even get into college if you hadn't read some Plato. Plato is the one who greatly informs most of our church fathers philosophically, and St. Augustine. And St. Thomas Aquinas is not at odds with St. Augustine. Some people say, well, which one do you follow? It's just not true. What Thomas Aquinas did is he was able to work Aristotle into St. Augustine. He cites Aristotle and St. Augustine the most. Sure, that'd be great. Pardon me. I've got a little cough here. Don't worry, it's COVID. No, I'm kidding. I've got a deviated septum, so I've got lots of flow going down. All right. So read the Republic. It is a wonderful dialogue, and this is what you'll discover. Plato's dialogues are a conversation between two people, and they're written as narratives. In that sense, they're much more like the Gospels. It's a narrative, and there's usually people arguing about age-old questions like, what is justice? You will find that probably the first 7 definitions of justice in Plato's Republic are the 7 most common definitions of justice that people still think. Everywhere from the biggest political philosophers that you can find who still live and breathe today, to some of your own professors. And Plato will show you how those definitions are wrong. Internally. It's really, really helpful. Because ironically, a lot of people talk about Plato and never read him, like Thomas Aquinas. Second, I would say, if you're going to read any Aristotle, unless you're a philosophy major, don't read metaphysics and categories. It'll probably go over your head. You need a master for that. Unless you need someone who help you, but talk to your priests. We're all supposed to have 4 years of philosophy before you even touch theology. Read Nicomachean Ethics. Nicomachean Ethics is a very excellent little book where he just puts forth the idea, is the good life, is it pleasure, is it pain, is it wealth getting, which is mostly what the university is pushing you towards, right, is wealth getting. That's why the business department gets more money in buildings than anyone else. And that's not a slam against business majors, but business majors, you need to be careful, right? You cannot worship God and mammon. You can't do that, right? So that money you got to be real careful with. The more money you have, the more responsibility you have to the church and to God. So read Nicomachean Ethics. And because there's also excellent advice in, I think it's book 10 of Nicomachean Ethics and 11, on friendship. One of the greatest things that wrecked all my friendships at UGA was reading Nicomachean Ethics. And he just said, there's friendships of pleasure and friendships of utility, and there's friendships of virtue, right? Those that you use, like study buddies, workout buddies, people you practice things with, so that's fine. Those aren't real friendships. If your hobby changes, those friends go away. There are friendships of pleasure, right? Like drinking buddies, or people you like to play sports with, or whatever. And there's friendships of virtue, those who actually want the good for you. And I know when I was at UGA, I got to think about all my friends, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have a single friend of virtue. Not one, right? And that was terrifying to me. So partly what I couldn't see is I'm not seeking the good. So I couldn't possibly be a friend of virtue myself. But that was deeply revealing of myself to myself. Right? It's like, what am I doing here? No idea why I'm here. Just sort of floating through life for the college experience, which is not what college is about. College is not about some kind of weird college experience at all. You are called to the intellectual life. That's why you're in the university. You're called to think for 4 years in our society, and hopefully the church sets you apart for 4 years to think and to read and to write. So don't waste it. It's not about experiences. It's about becoming someone with intellectual and moral habits who can then do the work of God wherever you are. And so I would say Nicomachean Ethics, Plato's Republic is really good, maybe his Meno or his Phaedrus, Symposium if you're interested in romantic love. Texts like these will actually acquaint you with how the ancients thought about reason, about running into contradictions and saying, I can finally close that door. I know it's absolutely wrong. It's absolutely wrong. That's okay. If there's a million doors, it's a million minus one. Now what? What's next? And so this is what Aquinas actually does if you read the Summa. He puts forth these definitions and seemingly really reasonable arguments, right? Objection 1, it is said, blah, 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 right? Objection 2, blah, blah, blah. Objection 3, and you're like, oh, that sounds like me. That's my position, or I think this, I know people who think this way. And then he'll give his answer of why it's wrong, and then he'll respond to each one of them. In that way, he's not trying to just argue against people. He's saying, I'll take your position. I understand why you think that way, and it seems extraordinarily reasonable. And in that way, it shows you something else about Aquinas. He's very humble, right? What we call epistemological humility, knowing that you don't know much. And so why not assume the other person's position to see if it makes sense, right? If it doesn't make sense, you're like, all right, maybe my position, maybe theirs is right. But if one of them doesn't contradict you, I can close that down. So that's philosophy and intellectual life, but there's that other part of Aquinas that's even more important, and that's his faith, right? Faith is an epistemological virtue. It helps you know things. Faith, pistis, is actually the Greek word from which we get the word epistemology. Epistemology is a discipline within philosophy. It's how you know things, right? How you know things. There's all kinds of different theories on how you know things. So we as Catholics say faith is not a feeling. It's not an ideology. It's actually a virtue. It's a habit. It's a habit of being. It actually helps you come to know God and to know yourself and to know your neighbor, that you may love them. Because in order to love someone, you have to know them. You can have the best intentions of the world for your friend Fred, and if you make him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and he's allergic to peanut butter and he dies, you did not love him. You can say, but I didn't mean to. So I totally agree, but listen, that ain't love. Right? It was an accident, but that's not love. Knowledge precedes love. And so faith, as this habit, helps you come to know more about what you are, because you're made in the image of God. So the more you know God, the more you know yourself. That's the fun thing about a friendship with God, is he begins to reveal you to yourself. All the dark corners of your soul become illuminated by the light. And so the Mass is, of course, of supreme primacy and importance. To receive God, to receive the light, and receive him daily if you can. Daily Mass, daily Eucharist, as much as you can. The more you do that, the more faithful you are to Christ, I promise you, the more you'll grow. Promise. As I said, I wasn't raised in any kind of church, so I've run into everything the wrong way, so I did everything wrong that could basically be done before I came to the Catholic faith. You know, I was the heathen at UGA. That's what I was. I was proud of it. And I slowly got broken down. That's what happened. So the Mass is of supreme primacy if one wants to be rational, ironically. Second, I would say the Liturgy of Hours is something that's largely forgotten. So if you're going to form a good moral community, y'all, these people who are faithful and want to show up to Mass and prayers and want to get to know each other, y'all have to actually form little cohorts of friendships of virtue. You need to actually get to know each other, right? Really, really well. And more than just, I like you and we hang out and it feels good to have activities and services together, I actually will your good, even when you get on my nerves today. I'll still will your good. We call that charity, actual love. So you have to form those kind of cohorts and friendships. And you should go to Mass together. And if you can, try to pray the Liturgy of Hours together, morning prayer, evening prayer. This will sink you into the narrative of Scripture. Most Catholics today are ridiculed by Protestants for not knowing the Bible. And then Catholics try to get to know the Bible in the way that Protestants get to know the Bible, which is just, I guess we start at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and just start reading. That doesn't really work, right? You can do that if you want, right? I mean, I read it, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Because I didn't have a master. I tried to read it for myself. I didn't know what any of the words mean. I hadn't read any of the contradictions. The way that Catholics have historically and traditionally, which are two different things, come to understand Scriptures is by praying them. So morning prayer and evening prayer. I will say the morning prayer and evening prayer that I pray, if I do that for a year, every day, morning, evening, I will pray 99.8% of the New Testament and about 52% of the Old Testament. It only takes me 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening. That's it. Which means cut out one Netflix show and you got it. Or binge one show less. But that would take the virtue of temperance to do. Right? So notice that. It takes moral growth and virtue for you to actually come to know the things that are good, for you to come to know God. St. Jerome famously says, ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ. And he's right about that. And so this is the way, if you want to actually know Scripture and to know what it means. Because that's the thing. The Liturgy of Hours puts together the Old and New Testament way that is revealing in such a way that the Protestants don't have. We, in our readings, focus on typology, right? So for instance, one day you might open up your readings, morning prayer and Liturgy of Hours, and you'll read Aaron takes, Abihu, Nadab, and his third son, I can't remember his name now, up the mountain. And then in the New Testament, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up the mountain. Like, weird. Oh, and by the way, if you look at the order of the names, Peter and Aaron are in the same order, right? Which is strange. It's like, oh, well, that guy's a high priest. So I guess Peter's a high priest. That's what Protestants meant in the Bible. Typology. They don't have that. And so if you engage in that with your friends, you will come to understand and know the scriptural narrative better than anyone else. Thomas Aquinas could not write the Summa if he had not been Dominican and had been required to pray morning, evening prayer every day. That is how he was able to write his table of contents and then to lay out his questions in accordance with the story of Scripture and of our tradition. And so, obviously, what you're doing there is you're forming groups of friends in the church bound by your baptismal covenants. You're engaging in certain philosophical readings and prayer and going to Mass. And what that does is it will actually open you up to thinking and patterns that are then applicable to anything you study. Anything. It sounds odd. Most people think that sounds like some kind of weird fundamentalist thing, like, right, then I'll be the kid in the back of the class in geography saying the world's only 5,000 years old. Is that what you're saying, Father? No. Not saying that at all. I'm saying something like this. The more you read Scriptures, read Philippians, Christ took on the form of man, right? Well, what's a form? What is that? Plato and Aristotle had a lot to say about form, right? The church fathers that you may read in the Scriptures or hear at Mass Well, actually, tell you the form of rationality is something intangible, what we call the soul, which is not that ghost thing inside your body. It doesn't exist. It just means the animate principle of things, right? Read something like that, and you'll start thinking something like this. So intelligence is something intangible. It's an animate principle. So then what in the world is artificial intelligence? What is that? And then if you read other people, as you read theologians, you run into people like Searle or Wittgenstein, you go, it could be artificial intelligence as a contradiction in terms. Bizarre. How does that illuminate computer science? How does it illuminate philosophy or theology? Or what about business? What does it mean to be intelligent at all? Or if I say reason, and I see reason popping up in various scriptures, and then I compare that to economics and political science, suddenly I have something to say in class. Right? What do you mean that it's rational to be selfish? Selfishness is a desire, a passion, which is a different faculty altogether. That's what we call a categorical fallacy, Dr. So-and-so. Suddenly, you will actually discover your faith has actually illuminated even the natural disciplines. And it all happens by accident. You don't mean to do it. It just gets in your bones. And you're like, oh, it's bizarre. I started thinking differently one day. I don't know when it happened. I couldn't pinpoint it for you. But suddenly I'm asking strange questions. I'm looking up different people and reading different things. And it's because of something that's sparked from morning prayer or from Mass. And in that way, you'll actually start to think more like Aquinas. Because it's not about memorizing information. It's about a pattern of thinking that's actually critical thinking, about a way to think. All right, that's all I have for now, because I imagine I've probably gone over my limit. Is that about right? Should I do Q&A or clap, or maybe pass baton it? Throw it? Any question. It could be about what I said. I don't know, I'm just rambling or anything else. Yes, sir. What's your name? Walter. What year? None year. You don't go here. Where do you go? What do you do? You what? You edit videos from home. Good. Is that like a job? Or is it fun? Very good. Okay. Excellent. How long you been doing that, Walter?
Recreationally, 7 years.
Okay. Good. Excellent. All right. What's your question, sir?
Well, my patron saint is John Paul II.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that he's regarded as a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any books that you think I should read that are by him?
St. John Paul II? He's a phenomenologist. I'm not a huge phenomenologist. There might be some books. Let me think. So the phenomenologists essentially got obsessed with experience, but everything being subjective. And the original group of them thought therefore there's no objective reality. And then eventually someone said, wait a minute, no. In order to have an experience, there has to be something out there, right? And then that became a Catholic strand of phenomenology. So St. John Paul II and St. Teresa Benedict of the Cross, St. Ina Stein, brilliant woman. In fact, most of John Paul II's theology on femininity and theology of the body, most people don't know this, deeply indebted to St. Teresa of the Cross, St. Benedict of the Cross, St. Ina Stein. His a book. Do you like philosophy?
This is honestly my interest.
Okay. Probably a simpler text would be like Love and Responsibility, if you're interested, like in a vocation of marriage, sex, children, family, right? I mean, this is like, that's kind of a big vocation. That's most people's vocation, right? Is being married. It's a way to become holy. If you like more philosophy, interested in sexuality, femininity, body, soul integration, transgender, homosexuality, stuff like that, his lectures, Theology of the Body, which is a compilation of lectures for a long time. Anyone else? Yes, sir. What's your name? Riley. All right, Riley. What year? What are you studying?
Third year
Biochemistry. Very good. Okay. What can I do for you?
So if we don't have a lot of time to jump into Plato and
Yeah.
Aristotle,
Right.
what would you say about getting started with Boethius and the constellation philosophy?
Yeah, That's a great start, right? Boethius, formerly known as Saint Severus in the old days, right? Constellation of Philosophy is a good start, yeah. Boethius is very interesting today because he is the one who gives the definition that St. Thomas Aquinas cites for person, an individual substance of a rational nature. So individual meaning this, not that. Substance being this thing, and of course it has a nature, it's something, but it's a rational kind. Aquinas picks up on that. If more of the Supreme Court justices would read Boethius, we'd probably be in better shape. But we make all the kinds of decisions, and you'll never, ever see them ever define what in the world they mean by person. That is one of the earliest steps in any dialectical move. Define your terms. If you don't define your terms, what are we talking about? So yeah, great pick. And excellent, especially if you want to prepare to die. Because that's what he was writing it for. So yeah, I'm going to die, so Constellation of Philosophy, here we go. Anyone else? Yes. Name, year, what do you study?
Grace.
Point of order.
3rd year.
Grace, 3rd year.
Landscape architecture and dance.
Okay. You're going to combine those, right? Dance pad. Okay, go ahead.
So you were saying that logic can be applied to art.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I feel like that's usually seen as the most subjective thing.
That's right. Yes. So I used to teach theology at Monsignor Donovan High School, an independent Catholic school here in town. The first thing I would do is for 2 weeks, I would just teach on the principle of non-contradiction. A thing cannot be and not be at the same time and reference the same object, right? So I cannot be here and not here at the same time and reference the same object, right? And so I'd slowly teach the kids this, right? And eventually what you can do is you can ask this question like this: is the principle of non-contradiction true or false? You say it's true. What if I try to say it's false? It's false that things cannot be true and false at the same time. What am I assuming? Anyone know? That it's not also true. If I say the principle of non-contradiction is false, then I can also say it's true and it's false. And then I can ask a question about that. Was it true and false that it's true and false? That it's true and false was true? And I end up in what's called an ad infinitum fallacy. So then I would do very simple examples like this. The bench is here or not here, and write it on the board, right? Here's proposition. The bench is here. It's not the case the bench is here. Yeah, right, principle of non-contradiction, fine. This cup is clear or not clear. Right, contradiction. Right. This casket is black and not black. Right. My hair is feathered and not feathered, or whatever. Right? Yeah. And there's one that always stumped them. Emotionally. We're both standing in front of this art piece, and I say it's beautiful, and you say it's not beautiful. And everyone wants to say, ooh, wait a minute. Logic doesn't get to invade art. If you think from a logical perspective, if I say this, that artwork is not beautiful, and you say, it is the case it's beautiful, right? You say, well, tomato, your opinion, my opinion. Here's what we're doing. We're no longer talking about the artwork out there. I'm saying I hold an idea, proposition, or concept or image in my mind. I'm saying it's true. You're saying it's false. And now I'm saying this thing in my head is true, or my mind. You're saying it in your mind, it's not true. We're now no longer talking about the same object out there. We're talking about two different objects. We've equivocated, fallacy of equivocation. We think we're talking about the same thing. So what you do is say, no, I don't care about your concepts or ideas. I'm talking about that thing over there. That artwork, you can't say it's X and not X. So it either is or is not beautiful. And that's logic. So if you want some excellent reading on Catholic philosophy and art, Thomas Aquinas has some sections on art. He says it's like prudence. Prudence is like right reason and action. Art is right making. And so the closest thing to art is like wisdom. But it's not the same thing. And it's important because the artist submits themselves to the artwork, right? Like you look at the stone, I will bring the lion out of the stone. You're submitting yourself to the work. So the work is good. And if it's the work that makes it good, that means an artist can be evil. They can be good or evil, right? You don't have to be moral to be a good musician or a good artist. And notice that. Some musicians and artists get really confused about this. They think, I'm cultivating virtue by doing art. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It could, though. If you submit, if your art actually affects you in some way, it actually could cultivate virtues and you become holier. But of course, we all also know some of those examples of the crazy artists who are in art school at 4:30 a.m., going nuts, hyped up on speed and cocaine, finishing their projects at 4:30. I used to go watch them. It's fun. So watch them pour the molten lava into the little tree, whatever art kids are making. So that's him. Some of the schoolmen that followed him: Jacques Maritain, famous French Catholic, early 20th century, famous for reviving Thomas Aquinas. He's mostly the reason why we're all talking about him today. He's revived about a century ago. And he's got a little essay, maybe it's 40 or 50 pages, that you have to work very slowly over. Also, St. John Paul II has got a letter to artists where he gives the most succinct, I think, and correct definition of art: the use of material to open a window to the infinite, not self-expression. Does that help? Great, yeah. So all that does is set you up, says, oh no, right? There has to actually be an objective answer to whether it's beautiful or not. And suddenly art opens up in a whole different kind of discipline than just it's all relative, right? Because that would be a contradiction. All right, other questions? Yes. Name, year, what you study.
My name's Maddie.
Maddie.
Here and I'm a genetic teacher.
Very good.
Okay, so I guess what's sort of confusing me about that line of logic, if you're using that line of logic, just
What line of logic is that?
the line of logic of art has to be beautiful or not.
Oh, that's not the line of that's a conclusion. The line of logic is things cannot be or not. I'm using the principle of non-contradiction. Yeah.
But I guess sort of where I'm getting a little bit lost with this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this once again, bear with me.
Yeah.
You're married to your wife. I don't find your wife attractive. You find your wife attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Is she attractive? Yes or no? Like that is kind of
Well, objectively, yes. That's why I married her.
like you see where I'm going?
No. So there's a difference in the order of knowing and the order of being. So what you're saying is, I don't know that, and therefore, how can it be true? And so that's your confusion is, I don't know it, or I have a different opinion. But the order of knowing does not mean that it has to actually bear the order of being. So whether I know that art is beautiful, or my wife is beautiful, or you know or don't know that this or that's beautiful, is irrelevant to whether it is or is not, right? So knowledge is not contingent on human understanding. So this is a really big, the philosophy that is sort of embodies that philosophical principle, that like the order of being has to conflate with the order of knowing. It's called rationalism. It's really popular from the 1800s onward. Does that make sense? Sort of? Absolutely, yeah.
So basically, you're saying you don't really know if your wife is attractive or not at the end of the day. He doesn't know that it has to one or the other.
So if I took an absolute sort of basic position, I would say from the principle of non-contradiction, I could say no one in the room knows if she is objectively beautiful or not. But we know that she has to be one or the other. Yeah, that's the most basic. From there, a discipline, say it's art, or it's this image of a woman or something, right? From there we'd say, how would we come to know that? What would be the criteria? How would you even know that's the criteria? How do you know we're not just arbitrarily putting that forward, right? But at the base, we would know a thing either is or ain't. It's either true or false. If it's a proposition, if it ends in a period, right? So sentences that are propositions are ones that can be falsified or validated, right? They're true or false. So like the bench is brown or it's wood or whatever. But like commands can't be true or false, right? If I said run and you said false, I'd say what? There are also propositions that are nonsense that cannot be true or false, right? A prerequisite for a proposition being true is it has to be sensical. So for example, the most famous sort of book to help you clarify your mind, it was really made for kids to help clarify their mind, is Alice in Wonderland, right? The Queen says, I think of 6 impossible things before breakfast every day. An impossible thing, what in the world is an impossible thing? An impossible thing means it's a contradiction. It cannot be, either in reality or in the mind. It's X and not X, right? So imagine something like a round square. A square has 4 sides, all equal, 4 90-degree angles. The second you try to round it, it ain't a square. In other words, just because I can say it doesn't mean it makes sense. So there are all kinds of propositions that can't be true or false, even if they sound like they could be true or false. So first we have to clarify our definitions to see, is this even a sensible question? And then 2, is it a proposition? And then is it true or false? So I hope that answers. I went off a little bit from what you're saying, but basically, yeah, it either has to be true or false, even if we don't know how to get the answer. Otherwise, we're saying contradictions exist. Yep. Mm-hmm.
If we know that everything is either one thing or another, how does that lead to how do we come to this situation?
I'm not saying things are one thing and the other. I'm saying a thing cannot be X and not X. Yeah, to put into like a symbolic form, right? A thing cannot be and not be at the same time, reference the same object. The mysteries of the church are things in which sometimes we cannot fully explain or understand, and yet we say that they're true, right? So, for example, it's like I'm sure someone will take beef with this, but let's take physics, for example, Newtonian physics and quantum mechanics, right? Quantum works on a quantum level, doesn't work on a Newtonian level, the everyday level. Newtonian works on this level, but not that level. We have no unified theory. We're trying to come with unified theory. In some sense, you can say both the theories are wrong in a way until we synthesize them into one unified theory to explain everything. Always you have something like a weird step function. So in other words, we have two practical theories, but we haven't really resolved the issue. There's a major contradiction there. That's Schrodinger's cat. He's saying, it's a reduction ad absurdum is what Schrodinger's doing. He's not saying a cat can be dead and alive. He famously says this, why is everyone using my example wrong? The whole point is to say there's a problem. And so that's all we're saying. So the mysteries of the church are that we're not rationalists. We don't think just because I don't know it, it can't be true. There are lots of things I don't know. There are lots of things we all are never going to know. It doesn't mean it's not true. Make sense? Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's lots of apologetics books that you can read. If you learn how to do dialectic, say, a large part of this is learning how to actually communicate in a logical fashion with people. But this deeply offends about half the population. To say, they put forth an argument. You say, what do you mean by, insert this word here, right? But here's the thing. What the ancients would tell you is this. If someone says, oh, I mean this, then you have a decent soul, someone who you can actually have a real dialogue with. If they get offended, they don't have the necessary disposition to actually rationally engage in inquiry. That's what it'd say. So for Protestants, what you do is you befriend them. Now, it can't necessarily be a perfect friend of virtue because they don't agree on all things when it comes to the faith, or even what the good is. But you can begin to have some kind of friendship with them. And as St. Allred cites from Cicero, friends of virtue are those who agree in all things in heaven and earth. And so sometimes it's actually very helpful to tell a good friend, it would just be easier if we were of the same faith. It'd be easier for our friendship, right? And that might be okay. It might be we're actually leading each other to something good. And maybe we can put aside random opinions and pursue truth together. I hope that's helpful. There's also Athens Catholic Radio 105.7, run by George Segalis, one of my parishioners. And I think it's like open line or call to communion. You have a lot of Protestants who call in there. Get some excellent everyday, like what I hear on that is exactly the kind of stuff I was steeped in. And they're usually great answers. Yes, sir.
I'm off this beauty topic.
What's your name? What year? And what do you study? Paul.
Year.
Fourth year.
Risk management.
Risk management. Okay.
Could we say that when somebody says, like, I think this art is beautiful, that the definition of beauty is kind of not used in the same way as when we say the good, the true, and the beautiful?
Well, yeah, most certainly. This is why so after a claim is made, you say, define your terms. What do you mean by beauty? Because if you have two different definitions, it could be there's no contradiction because you're actually equivocating. By beauty, I mean X is really A. Or, by beauty, I mean A. And you go, oh, by beauty, I mean B. You go, oh, there's no contradiction. We're saying A and B. And then we say, does B actually mean not A? In which case it's a contradiction. Or is B not touch A, in which case actually we're both right and we're using different definitions? That can actually resolve arguments in different ways too.
Well, so yeah, when you say, couldn't we theoretically know if something, with the definition of beauty being of pointing to God, couldn't we know theoretically what beauty is if something is beautiful in that?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, so I think Aquinas' section on beauty is pretty short. There are definitions, arguments there. You can read Plato, where he explores beauty from a natural law perspective, right? That's what's beautiful about Plato is he says, I don't know anything, but apparently all these other guys in my culture think they know things. So what do you say art or beauty is? And after about 30 or 40, 50 pages, he rules out a bunch of definitions, and you at least come to a best guessed hypothesis so far. This one does not run into contradiction to the other ones did. And that's the great thing about Socrates. He never says, this is absolutely perfect, and I know it, because he didn't have revelation. Well, we as Catholics, yeah, you could come to beauty, right? Beauty is God. God is beauty. But beauty in some sense is the good viewed from a different aspect. Gentleman back.
My name is
Johnny?
Johnny. I'm a business management major, and I'm a second year. So I have a question. My question was, well, I think you look very, very familiar to John Krasinski.
I look familiar to who? John Krasinski?
The guy who plays Jim Halpern in The Office.
Oh, yeah. I've been getting that more and more the older I get. It's because of the beard. If I shave it off, I don't get that anymore.
I had a conversation with someone, and I said, oh, I think, that just looks like John Krasinski. And they go, no, I don't see the resemblance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we started arguing about what you said about the art, where it's no longer like the concept that we're talking about, it's
Mhm.
now the stuff in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
How do you transfer from, like, or I guess how do you avoid doing that and
Yeah, right. So what you do is all knowledge begins in the senses. So you keep it incarnational, concrete. We're talking about this thing here. So instead of going, yaha, nah, yaha, and making eye contact with them, say, well, look here. And then you need to make an argument from what you see. But the whole thing is, the second you're using language, you're no longer just appealing to experience, right? I mean, there's no such thing as raw experience. Everything's interpreted through concepts and frameworks. That doesn't mean it's relative. Doesn't mean it's made up, right? In the same way, mathematics, right? We could use the Roman numeral system or the Phoenician system, or we could use, there's all kinds of different ways of writing numbers down, right? And those are social constructs, and yet they put forth something true, right? I can have an equation that shows me where Mars will be in 18 minutes. And so you're fine to say, here's my language, my words, my concepts I'm using. I'm making an argument that he looks like Jim, because, is it Jim? John? John, thank you. It's like John because John, I don't know what, is pale and pasty. Whatever it is, right? So what you do is, you make reference back to what you're seeing with your senses, and then you're articulating it with clean concepts that are coherent, that actually give an account of all the data, right? This is what you do in any sort of good method, art, or science is, what's the best guess hypothesis? Does it give an account of the most data? Am I manipulating data? Am I excluding things, right? Sometimes in arguments, what people do is they say, no, it's the eyes or the head. And he goes, no, it's the arms and the body or whatever. And you have to say, look, we can't manipulate data here. Throw it all in the pot, and then let's have the argument. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful. Other question? Yes. About who? Nicomachean ethics. Nico Mach, Nicomachean, E-A-N. Nicomachean ethics. It starts with what it starts with is, what is happiness? And why do men want it? And then it gets into what's required to get it. And by the end, it says, and there's one thing we've missed, friendship, as a necessity, right? Which is really important. One of the things that plague us as American Catholics is we think that, especially as we've accidentally swallowed a lot of Protestant concepts, we think that the Catholic faith is about having a private relationship with Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. We sound like Baptists half the time, or evangelicals. We're communal creatures. We have communion because we're in communion with God and our neighbor, right? St. John says you cannot love God and hate your brother. And so friendship actually is huge, right? And Thomas Aquinas, following St. Elred, says that you can essentially articulate your relation with Christ as friendship. That is what marks you as different than the evangelicals down the street from Wesley. Wesley talks about relationships, but listen, my banker says he has a relationship with me. And I go, yeah, you're my banker. And my butcher's got a relationship with me. And everyone's got, relationship is a plastic word. It means everything and nothing all at the same time. Friendship, though, is really specific. You have to have mutual affection, mutual goodwill, common life, common work, common belief. That starts to put flesh on what it means to be a friend of God and be friends with fellow Catholics toward the good. Other questions? Paul again.
Is there any writings on what our relationships will be like in heaven with other human beings we were friends with or spouses with,
Well, there is no marriage in heaven except the one between the church and the Lamb. Yes. Have you ever been to there's a good one called The Gospel. Have you read it? How about Revelation? No. Revelation, is it chapter 22 or 21? And I saw the heavens descending from above, right? Like a bridegroom, right, ready for the groom. And God said, behold, my dwelling place is among mortals. I will be their God, they will be my people. The resurrection is like a wedding. And in particular, the resurrection forever is actually like a wedding reception. You ever been to a wedding reception? You guys know what a wedding reception is? When you hear the phrase heavenly banquet, if you're like, okay, that sounds kind of like, I don't know, mead hall. I don't know if I want that. Translate it as wedding reception. Good wine, dancing, lots of music, best friends, family, all of that. If you look at ancient manuscripts, and there's depictions of heaven, they're all like holding hands and doing social dances. Because individual dancing is kind of a new phenomenon in the last few hundred years. Probably like last 100, really, right? Probably clubs have something to do with that. Can you imagine the Puritans doing individual dancing? Yeah. But it's a wedding reception, right? I mean, Jesus' first miracle, wedding at Cana of Galilee, right? He's saying, heaven's like this, y'all. Pay attention. Best food, best drink, free wine. Now we know in part and dimly, through a mirror dimly, but then we shall know as we are known. So you'll know everyone and everything. And you'll be resurrected perfectly. Yes. Yeah, because there's one Father and one family of God. And who is my mother, who is my brother? Those who do the will of God. We'll all be brothers and sisters, right? That's why Catholics call each other brothers and sisters. Brethren. Yes, sir, in the back. Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question. The paradox. So you're a classics major. The tragedians are masters of showing paradoxes and or contradictions, but they can never resolve them. That's always their problem. They can point them out, right? So like, what's the trilogy? What's the Return of the Jedi of Oedipus? Yeah, the third one. No, of Oedipus. Antigone, that's it. I remember. Antigone, the third one in the series. Antigone, for example, right? Yeah, I know. I was mixing all kinds of stuff on you. Antigone, to bury my brother or not to bury my brother, to obey the king or not to obey the king. It would seem God commands us, and even a Catholic should know this, right? We're to obey all authorities insofar as you can. The state orders you not to bury your brother, but honor and duty in your faith order you to bury your brother. What do you do? It would seem to be a contradiction to do either one, wouldn't it? You can either disobey the state, Romans, or when you disobey God, right? Book of Tobit, it's a work of mercy. This is the paradox, right? So a paradox is where you have a line of logic, a line of thinking. Maybe some of you have found this in your disciplines, and you map out every possibility, maybe 2 possibilities, maybe 1,000,000 possibilities that this line of logic or thinking can go. And think about it, the way I think about it is like a maze. You know, you get in a maze sometimes, and you come upon a place, and you're like, all right, I got 4 options here, and you go down one, and you explore everything, and you're like, oh no, they're all dead ends. What do? Come back here. 2, oh no, they're all dead ends. 3, all dead ends. 4, dead ends. You come back, what do? You turn around. You go, nope, wrong way. I made the wrong turn was that first step. I should have taken the right way back there. A paradox is where you are following a train of logic, and if no matter what you do, you always run into a contradiction, it means you made a bad assumption somewhere. There's a bad turn somewhere else. So paradox means either the definition or the very first assumptions were wrong, right? That's what the reductio ad absurdum allows us to do. Is if everything I'm running into contradiction, it's not that this is a contradiction. There's no such thing as contradictions. Contradictions are just that words against themselves. They don't represent anything in reality, like a round square. It means I did something wrong. It's like the race was this way, and they fired the gun, and I took off running this way. Does that make sense? So a paradox is actually really helpful sometimes. It means I thought about this whole thing wrong from the get-go. And classically in Greek, right? I mean, Greek or Latin? Mainly Latin, yeah. The Greek phrase metanoia, sometimes they say is to change one's mind, the nous or the intellect, to turn away from. We translate it in the gospel as repent. Repent. You had all the wrong first axioms and all the wrong definitions. Turn away to a new path, right? Does that help?
Yeah, I have a follow-up.
Shoot.
So what would you say, because I guess people sometimes forget, they use the word paradox, maybe it's not actually a paradox.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's not, well, we like irony.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's sort of a theme, right? People can define terms how they want. This is why you got to get them to define their terms. Yeah.
So, for instance, like, this might just be like a bad example, but like, in our faith, we say like, in order to live, essentially you have to die.
Mm-hmm.
That seems
Yes.
paradoxical.
Yes.
You would say probably that's not paradoxical.
I would say it seems paradoxical. Yes. So sometimes in the gospel, Jesus seems to use paradoxes, doesn't he? What he's doing is he's equivocating terms. So you must lose your life to gain it. The first time he uses life, there's one definition. When he says it, and he's referring to life, it's a second definition of life. In other words, there's this thing that you value or you hold true called life, and I'm telling you, you got to stop thinking that way. And there's some other kind of life, right? So, for example, right, one of the things that we've all discovered in COVID is we're all afraid to die as a country, right? And the more and more Catholics think that way, the more and more we should think, man, we're really unfaithful. We're scared of death. That's like the whole epitome of Boethius. This is preparation not to die and not to ever fear death. If you've been baptized, you've already died in Christ. What in the world do you have to fear? Life's an adventure now. Quit being a coward. Right? So, you'll see this in the gospel frequently, these sorts of equivocations. And as a philosopher, when I first read them, I was like, this is contradictory nonsense. That's how I read it. That's how I was like, I don't know how anyone can believe this. This is just this is like violates the most fundamental principles of logic. And I was just wrong. I didn't think, paradox, right? And the more I read literature and classics with that, the more I didn't have such a rigid, rationalistic approach to logic. It actually was very helpful for me. I was reading more and more classics. I read a lot of classics shortly before I converted, including Antigone and the Iliad, that actually pointed me towards Catholicism, sort of in my ongoing dialogue. Johnny.
I was reading something, but it said that the best way to determine morality, or like what separates like a human being from like an animal, is presenting them with something where they gain no punishment nor reward,
Returning a shocking. Oh, returning a shopping cart. What if it's at Aldi with a quarter? Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. They do, and I do. Because I'm John Krasinski. So. And they're terrible human beings. Those people who just leave them in the parking lot. Yeah. Special place below. Absolutely, absolutely, yes, yes. Think about it this way. Imagine we had like a whole pew full of little innocent children, like ages 4 to 8, right? And I was like, Johnny, I need you to come up here and execute every one of these girls. Here's your needle, here's a refiller thing, and after every execution, for whatever reason, no one clapped, you got no reward for it. You're like, I gotta make sure I sterilize this in between shots. You sterilize the needle in between shots. Like we don't want you to get that last minute infection, so we clean it, and then you kill them, right? And no one claps when you sterilize it, right? Nothing good, nothing bad, no one's clapping, nothing like that. Therefore, that's a moral action. So you don't really believe that? Yes, but that's not the important part, John. Johnny, the important part is this. A moral action is where you get nothing out of it. It's completely disinterested, and yet you persist in doing it anyways, right? So you sterilizing that needle in between killing each little girl is a moral action, right? Well, so Johnny has a decision to make here, right? So this is how dialectic works. Johnny can either say yes and remain logically consistent with that and say, yes, that's moral, right? Or he can say, actually, I don't believe that, so I renounce the principle. That's how dialect works, right? That would be more like thinking like Aquinas. So Johnny, do you think that would be a moral thing? To sterilize the needle in between each execution. It would have no value, but it would be moral. So what do you mean by moral? It would not be moral. Okay, so then we don't really think that just because it's disinterested that it's therefore moral. Right? Now, what the position you're putting forth is very popular. It's called Kantian ethics from Immanuel Kant. He's the one who put forth this idea that in order for something to be ethical, it has to be disinterested, right? So this is where you get the idea of like you do something really good for someone, but you just like hate it. That's when you're most good, right? It's like joyless duty. Right? That's how you really know it's a selfless sacrifice. Many Catholics and Protestants have fallen into this trap. Kant is to Protestantism as Plato and Aristotle are to Catholicism. So be careful of that. God promises us happiness, which is fulfillment. And so actually, when you are loving your neighbor and doing service, you should actually have a sense of fulfillment. Now we would say, that's selfish. Well, then it's selfish in some sense that's good, because it's fulfillment. But it's not selfish since you're doing it for your sake. You're doing it for God's sake. You do that, then it's good. Does that make sense? A lot of people forget that the second command, love thy neighbor as thyself, means you're supposed to love yourself. Right? So this idea that we're not supposed to, that loving yourself is bad, that's Protestant. Right? Which actually contradicts Jesus' own words in second commandment. So. All right, come on down here and get to these executions. Let's go. I went too long.
So just a few announcements before you guys leave. Our Students for Life event is tomorrow at 7 p.m. Next week we have men's and women's events on Tuesdays at 8 Ignite is at 8 on Wednesday. And then on Thursday next week at 7 p.m., we will be having a talk on racial injustice by Paul Albert. And before you guys leave, we have new arch calendars in the back for you guys to grab. And if you have any prayer intentions, please drop them off in our prayer basket. And if you guys could